I'm Lauren Hayes, 34, a marketing director. I thought I had control over my life until the photographs hit the mahogany table like leaves in a storm, each one landing face up with deliberate precision. My sister-in-law Sarah's manicured fingers released them one by one, her emerald eyes gleaming with something that made my stomach clench. The sharp scent of her perfume mixed with the stale aroma of untouched coffee cooling in bone china cups. "Your wife has been with other men," Sarah spat, her voice dripping with barely contained glee. Her face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before, like she'd been waiting years to deliver this moment. "Multiple men, Lauren. Look at them." My heart turned to ice. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the cream-colored walls pressing inward as I stared at the images scattered before me. A woman with dark hair like mine, entering hotels, laughing with strangers, her hand on another man's arm. But something was wrong with the photos. The angles were too perfect, too staged. The woman's face was always partially obscured, always turned just enough away from the camera. My husband David sat frozen at the head of the table, his usually confident posture crumbled into something small and defeated. His blue eyes, the same ones that had looked at me with such love on our wedding day 10 years ago, couldn't meet mine. Instead, he studied his hands as if they held the answers to questions he was too afraid to ask. "David." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Look at me." Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, the first drops of rain began tapping against the tall windows of our Victorian home, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass. The sound should have been soothing, it always had been before. Now it felt like nature itself was weeping. "I hired a private investigator," Sarah continued, her voice gaining momentum like a train picking up speed. "After I saw how distant you'd become, how many late nights you were working. David deserved to know the truth about his precious wife." I clutched my leather handbag tighter, my knuckles white against the black material. Inside, my phone buzzed once, then twice. The vibration felt distant, unimportant compared to the earthquake happening in my chest. 10 years of marriage, of building a life together, of planning for children we'd never had time to conceive. All of it crashing down because of photographs that didn't even look right. "These aren't me," I said, my voice stronger now. I picked up one of the photos, studying the woman's profile. "Sarah, this isn't me. Don't lie to us anymore, Lauren." Sarah's voice turned sharp, cutting. "The investigator followed you for weeks. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even witness statements. You've been living a double life." David finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke something fundamental inside me. It wasn't anger, it was resignation. He'd already decided I was guilty. My own husband had looked at these fabricated images and chosen to believe them over 10 years of faithfulness, of love, of building a life together brick by brick. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. I could smell it now, that clean, electric scent that comes before a real storm. My hands were shaking as I set the photograph back down, but not from fear. Something else was building inside me, something cold and calculating. "You want to know what's really been happening during those late nights?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. I reached into my handbag, my fingers finding the manila envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. "You want to know why I've been distant?" Sarah's triumphant expression flickered for just a moment. David leaned forward slightly, the first real interest he'd shown since this nightmare began. I pulled out the envelope but didn't open it yet. Instead, I looked at both of them, really looked at them. Sarah with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress, sitting in my dining room like she owned it. David with his weak chin and weaker spine, unable to defend the woman he'd promised to love and protect. "None of you know what's coming next," I said softly. The front door slammed open with such force that all 3 of us jumped. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer, moving with purpose toward the dining room. Sarah's face went white as fresh snow, and David's mouth fell open in shock. A man's voice called out from the hallway, deep and authoritative. "Mrs. Hayes? We need to talk."
Now.
Detective Marcus Rivera stepped into our dining room like he owned it, his weathered face scanning the scene with practiced efficiency. Rain droplets clung to his dark coat, and the scent of wet asphalt followed him inside. Behind him stood a younger woman in a crisp navy suit, her badge glinting under the chandelier's warm light. "Detective Rivera, Fraud Division," he announced, his eyes settling on the scattered photographs. "And this is Agent Chen from the FBI's cybercrime unit." Sarah's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Her face had drained of all color, transforming her from predator to prey in the span of a heartbeat. David looked between the officers and me, confusion replacing the resignation in his eyes. "Lauren?" David's voice cracked. "What's going on?" I opened the manila envelope with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, and surveillance photos, real ones this time. I spread them across the table, covering Sarah's fabricated evidence with the truth. "Your sister has been embezzling from her company for 2 years," I said, my voice steady as granite. "She's also been running an elaborate blackmail scheme, targeting wealthy wives in the city. I've been working with the authorities for 3 weeks to build a case against her." Agent Chen stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." The sound that escaped Sarah's throat wasn't quite human, a strangled gasp that spoke of a world collapsing. She lunged for the photographs she'd brought, trying to gather them up, but Detective Rivera was faster. His large hand covered the images, and when he lifted them, I could see what I'd suspected all along. "Deepfake technology," Agent Chen explained, examining one of the photos. "Sophisticated digital manipulation. Ms. Mitchell hired a tech expert to superimpose Mrs. Hayes' face onto images of other women. The metadata shows they were created last month." David stared at his sister like he'd never seen her before. "Sarah, why?" "Because she needed money," I answered for her. Her gambling debts were mounting, and her company was getting suspicious about the missing funds. She thought if she could destroy our marriage, she could convince you to give her access to our joint accounts. Maybe even get you to leave me everything in a divorce. Sarah's hands were shaking now as Agent Chen read her rights. The rain outside had become a full downpour, sheets of water cascading down the windows like tears. The sound filled the spaces between words, a natural soundtrack to the unraveling of a life built on lies. "How did you know?" David asked, his voice barely audible. I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. "She made one crucial mistake. 3 weeks ago, she sent me a text meant for someone else, coordinates for a meeting and a message about the Hayes job." I started paying attention after that. The memory of that night came flooding back, sitting in our bedroom at 2 a.m., staring at that accidental text, feeling the first cold fingers of suspicion wrap around my heart. I'd spent the next day retracing Sarah's recent visits, her sudden interest in our finances, her pointed questions about our marriage. I contacted Detective Rivera the next morning. I continued. "We set up surveillance, monitored her communications. She's been blackmailing 4 other women in the city using the same method. Creating fake evidence of affairs, then demanding money to keep quiet." Sarah finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "David, you have to believe me. I was trying to protect you. She's been..." "Stop." David's voice cut through her protests like a blade. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked at me with something approaching recognition. "Just stop." Agent Chen guided Sarah toward the door, but she twisted back, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I know about your precious wife, David. Ask her about the clinic visits. Ask her about Dr. Morrison." My blood turned to ice water. David's head snapped toward me, questions forming in his eyes that I wasn't ready to answer. "Not like this. Not with Sarah's poison still hanging in the air between us." "What clinic visits?" David asked quietly. The rain hammered against the windows with renewed fury, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. I clutched the edge of the table, feeling the solid wood beneath my fingers, grounding myself for what I had to say next. "David, there's something else we need to discuss," I said carefully. "But not here. Not like this." Detective Rivera paused at the doorway, Sarah's arm in his grip. "Mrs. Hayes, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. And we'll need those original documents you've been collecting." I nodded, but my attention was fixed on my husband's face. The confusion there was shifting into something else, hurt, maybe, or fear. After 10 years of marriage, I could read his expressions like a familiar book, but this one was written in a language I didn't recognize. "Lauren," he said, and my name sounded different in his mouth now. "What clinic visits?" The front door slammed shut, taking Sarah and her lies with it, but the damage was already spreading through the room like spilled wine on white fabric. I had won this battle, exposed the truth about the photographs and the blackmail scheme. But Sarah's parting shot had opened a door I'd been keeping carefully locked. Outside, a car engine started and pulled away, carrying my sister-in-law toward a future of courtrooms and prison cells. The rain continued its relentless assault on our windows, and in the sudden quiet of our dining room, I could hear David's breathing, shallow and uncertain. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you months ago." David's face went pale, and he sank back into his chair like a man preparing for another blow. "What is it?" I reached into my handbag one more time, my fingers finding the small white envelope I'd been carrying like a secret weight. The envelope that contained test results, appointment schedules, and a truth that would change everything between us. But before I could pull it out, before I could find the words to explain, the lights went out. The power failure plunged us into darkness, so complete it felt like being swallowed. Outside, the storm had intensified beyond anything natural, and in the distance, I could hear the sound of sirens, multiple sirens, growing closer. David's voice came through the darkness, tight with fear. "Lauren, what the hell is happening?" The emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows across our dining room as the backup generator hummed to life. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see flashing red and blue lights approaching, not just one or two vehicles, but an entire convoy. The sirens grew louder, more urgent, until they seemed to fill the very air around us. "Stay away from the windows," I said, my voice cutting through David's confusion. I pulled the white envelope from my bag, but kept it pressed against my chest. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully." "What's in the envelope, Lauren?" His voice was strained, caught between the betrayal he'd just witnessed and the fear of what was coming next. "And why are there police cars surrounding our house?" The siren stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of rain and our ragged breathing. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, too many to count. Heavy footsteps splashed through puddles in our driveway, moving with military precision. "The clinic visits Sarah mentioned," I began, my hands trembling as I held the envelope. "I've been seeing Dr. Morrison at the Federal Medical Facility downtown. Not for what you think, David. Not for an affair or anything like that." A megaphone crackled to life outside. "This is Agent Harrison, FBI. We have the house surrounded. Lauren Hayes, we need you to come out with your hands visible." David's face went white as bone. "FBI? Lauren, what have you done?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the bitter taste of irony. "I haven't done anything wrong, David. That's the problem." The truth spilled out of me like water through a broken dam. 6 months ago, I witnessed something at work. A meeting I wasn't supposed to see, documents I wasn't supposed to read. My company, Meridian Marketing, they're not just handling advertising campaigns. They're laundering money for a criminal organization. Millions of dollars, David. And when I tried to report it through proper channels, I discovered the corruption goes all the way to the top. David stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're in witness protection?" "Not officially. Not yet." I opened the envelope with shaking fingers, revealing medical documents and psychological evaluations. Dr. Morrison is a federal psychiatrist. He's been helping me prepare for what comes next: new identity, relocation, complete severance from our old life. The stress was killing me, David. Literally. My blood pressure, anxiety attacks, insomnia. I've been falling apart for months. The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Black-clad figures poured into our foyer, their tactical gear gleaming under the emergency lights. FBI. Everyone on the ground now. Don't move. I shouted to David, raising my hands high. We're cooperating. Agent Harrison appeared in our doorway, his face grim behind tactical goggles. Behind him, I could see at least 6 other agents, their weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. The scent of rain and gunpowder filled the air. Mrs. Hayes, we need to move you immediately, Harrison said, his voice urgent. Your cover has been blown. Sarah Mitchell's arrest triggered a response from the organization. They know you're the witness. David struggled to his feet, his face a mask of confusion and terror. Witness to what? Lauren, I don't understand any of this. The Kozlov Syndicate, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Russian money laundering through legitimate businesses. My company was their primary front on the East Coast. When I stumbled onto their operation, I became a liability. Agent Harrison stepped closer, his eyes scanning the windows for threats. Ma'am, we have intelligence that a hit team is en route to this location. We need to extract you now. What about David? I asked, my heart breaking as I looked at my husband's terrified face. What about my marriage? He can come with us to a safe house temporarily, but Mrs. Hayes. Harrison's voice softened slightly. You know what the long-term options are. Complete relocation with a new identity, or... He didn't need to finish. The alternative was death. David found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. You're leaving me. I don't want to, I said, tears streaming down my face. David, I've been trying to find a way to tell you for months. The late nights, the distance, I was meeting with federal agents, preparing for this moment. I was trying to protect you by keeping you out of it. And Sarah knew? Sarah suspected something, but she thought it was an affair. She hired that private investigator to follow me, but he was incompetent. He never got close enough to see who I was really meeting with. So she fabricated the evidence, thinking she could use it to destroy our marriage and get access to our money. A new sound cut through the rain, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Agent Harrison pressed his earpiece, listening to rapid-fire communications. We're out of time, he announced. Mrs. Hayes, we need to go. Now. I looked at David one last time, memorizing his face, the way his brown hair fell across his forehead when he was worried, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the wedding ring he still wore despite everything that had happened tonight. I love you, I said, the words carrying 10 years of marriage, of shared dreams, of a future we would never have. I've loved you since the day we met, and I will love you until the day I die. But if I stay, they'll kill us both. David stepped toward me, his hand reaching out. Lauren, please. There has to be another way. There isn't. I pressed the medical documents into his hands. These will explain everything, the stress, the medical issues, why I couldn't tell you. Dr. Morrison's contact information is in there. He can help you understand. Agent Harrison took my arm gently but firmly. Ma'am. As we moved toward the door, David called out, Will I ever see you again? I stopped, my heart shattering into pieces, so small they could never be put back together. I don't know. The helicopter was landing in our backyard now, its rotors whipping the rain into a frenzy. Through the kitchen windows, I could see neighbors' lights coming on, faces pressed against glass, trying to understand the chaos that had erupted in their quiet suburban street. Mrs. Hayes, Agent Harrison said urgently, we have to move. I took one last look at our dining room. The mahogany table where we'd shared thousands of meals, the china cabinet filled with wedding gifts, the family photos on the mantelpiece. 10 years of life, reduced to memories I would carry into an uncertain future. Lauren, David's voice broke as he called my name. I turned back one final time. Take care of yourself, David. And remember, none of this was your fault. None of it. Then Agent Harrison was pulling me through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the storm. The helicopter's rotors were deafening, the downdraft turning the rain into stinging needles against my skin. As we ran across the flooded lawn, I could hear David shouting my name from the house, his voice growing fainter with each step. The helicopter lifted off, just as black SUVs screeched into our driveway. Through the aircraft's window, I watched our house grow smaller, watched David's silhouette in the doorway shrink until it disappeared entirely. The storm swallowed everything, our home, our neighborhood, our life together. Agent Harrison handed me a headset, his voice crackling through the static. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. I know this isn't how you wanted it to end." I pressed my face against the cold window, watching the city lights blur past below. Somewhere down there, David was reading medical documents that would explain why his wife had been slowly disappearing for months. Somewhere down there, Sarah was sitting in a jail cell, her blackmail scheme exposed, but her final act of cruelty complete. And somewhere in the darkness, people who wanted me dead were discovering an empty house and a cold trail. "It's not an ending," I said quietly, my breath fogging the glass. "It's a beginning." The helicopter banked sharply, carrying me toward a future I couldn't imagine, away from a past I could never reclaim. Below us, the storm raged on, washing away the last traces of Lauren Hayes, marketing director, wife, woman who had loved and been loved. Tomorrow, I would wake up as someone else entirely. But tonight, as we flew through the darkness above a city that no longer held my home, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I was leaving behind. The betrayal that had started this nightmare, Sarah's lies, David's doubt, the photographs scattered across our dining room table, had indeed made me unstoppable. But not in the way any of us had expected. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from everything you've ever known, carrying nothing but the truth and the hope that somewhere, in some distant future, love might find a way to survive even the most impossible circumstances. The helicopter disappeared into the storm, and Lauren Hayes became a ghost, a memory preserved in medical documents and the broken heart of a man who would spend the rest of his life wondering what he could have done differently. But that's a story for another time.